your weekly horoscope with Jerry and Matt.
Hey, good evening, horror fans. Welcome to another edition of the Weekly Horoscope. I'm your host, Jerry, here with my partner, Matt. And Matt, this week we're going to continue our Best of the Decade series, and we're going to move forward into the 1940s. And the 1940s is kind of an interesting time in horror. It's almost a period of change where you saw the explosion of the Universal monsters in the 30s. And by the 40s, the last one left really was the Wolfman from 1941. Beyond that, they really started to deteriorate into crossovers and sequels and combo movies where you'd have the Wolfman and Frankenstein in a story concocted to run together. Yeah. And it really the quality dwindled down from what we consider classics to be almost camp.
Very similar to what's going on with the MCU, the Marvel universe now, right? It started off like 20 years ago, and it was cool, and people liked it, and you had all these characters, and they had so much like low quality integration of it. I think that's kind of what happened then, right? You see all these low quality integrations, kind of like 20 years had gone by. Bela Lugosi, I think it was 1948 when Abbott and Costello meet Frankenstein, and Bela hadn't done Dracula in like 17 years or something.
Yeah, he's only on film twice as the actual role of Dracula, and that's Todd Browning's 1931 original, the classic, the definitive portrayal by Lugosi. And he replicates the role in Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein, a horror comedy. So interesting, and that movie kind of holds at least that historical significance for that fact, if no other.
Yeah, and you can actually tell that the quality had diminished, and they were still just trying to make money off it somehow because they made a parody of it. Like it had gotten to the point where, like, when you're watching a comedy of it, you're like, well, how can we take these characters serious in a movie if we're watching this comedy of them? And it makes you realize it had just lived its life. It wasn't as scary as it was 17 years ago.
Sure.
So now they're just taking those characters and having fun with making some money with it, reprising it, kind of giving some fan service to people that just kind of enjoyed it anyways. And it works. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's, we'll cover it in detail as we get to the movie, but from your exact point, Lon Chaney Jr. was kind of upset that they'd taken the scare out of the creatures and had done that to him because he was with it from the beginning. He's the only person to ever portray the Wolfman in all its iterations in Universal, and he was proud of that. And he really thought that, geez, what have we done to these characters?
Yeah, I can see that from an artistic standpoint where he was coming from, but from a studio perspective, they're trying to make money, and that's where the money was like, listen, we're not going to sell these pictures like we used to.
The lifelong battle between the studio and the artist.
The artist, yeah,
absolutely.
It's very evident with it, but it's a fun movie, right? That's what happened. I don't even think Costello wanted to do it originally, right? See, you had the horror people going, no, this isn't horror, and Costello was like, no, this isn't real comedy. You know what I mean? So they had to just somehow make it work, and they did.
Yeah, and they actually pull it off very well. The other thing the 1940s brought was kind of a misdirection or a shift into a more serious tone of movies, away from the traditional quote unquote monsters, if you will, and kind of a more serious, and producer Val Lewton was one of the driving forces behind that. And, some of the movies he produced would be certainly candidates for this classification. Cat People and the first movie we talk about tonight are both Val Lewton productions. And really, I think the 40s overall is a pretty weak period. I would point to The Wolfman, as we mentioned, as a high point. I would point to Cat People as a fairly strong movie. Dead of Night is one of the first and still one of the best anthologies ever put together. And then the decade kind of wraps up with the Abbott and Costello. I don't think it's a great decade for horror, but we're going to talk about a couple that we dove into here.
Yeah, I mean, but it also, I mean, historically, it had its moments. You know, you could see when you were transitioning from one style, kind of getting away from that old style. You could kind of see it happening. So that I think that's interesting when you see these movies.
For sure. Our first movie is 1945's Isle of the Dead, directed by Mark Robson, and it is an RKO film produced by Val Lewton and stars the great Boris Karloff, and he plays a general who they call the watchdog, and he's hard nosed and he's by the book. And at the beginning of the movie, he gives a guy a pistol because the guy who was leading a group of troops, some of the troops lagged behind, and the guy left the tent and just shot himself. So that's how hardcore the general was.
I thought he was relieving him of his duty. I thought he gave him his gun, was letting him go, and then you hear the gunshot go off, and he's like, "Oh, okay." He let him. Yeah.
There's no second chances there. So they established that in the.
And he was his friend too. That they're showing his character. Like, wasn't he your friend? And he was like, "Yeah, but I'm an officer first, and I'm a patriot first, or something like that." And it's like, wow, this guy's hardcore. There's no line. Yeah.
Yeah. So real hardcore. He meets Oliver Davis as a newsman. He writes for the paper, and he's covering the war. And he wants to go over to the Isle of Dead. And the general says, "Well, I need to go there also. I need to visit my wife's grave."
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, "Well, why wait till morning? Let's just go tonight." So the two men get on a little rowboat and they go visit the Isle of the Dead, which is basically an island cemetery.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Where there's like mausoleum and stuff where he can kind of go in there and his crypts.
Yes. So when they get there, the general goes into the grave or the crypt of where his wife was, and the grave has been desecrated and the coffin is empty. And they're like, "Well, geez, that was a wasted trip." And they start to leave, and then they hear singing from this abandoned island, and they decide to investigate.
I thought that was a little funny right there. It's a short movie. It's not a long movie, like an hour and 20 minutes, and an hour and 10 minutes, I think. And he's just like, "Yeah, my mom's not there. Let's go."
Yeah,
that was it. Moving the plot forward. I was like, all right.
Yeah, let's beat it. And then they hear the singing, and they said, "Okay, we better check this out." And they come to a house that's owned by an architect, and he's housing a variety of people. It's kind of one of those movies where there's just this odd cast of characters all collected in one place for no really established reason. Which
none. Yeah, they all have their own story. There's all these archetypes. There's like the nun. There's the archaeologist who's there. There's the doctor who's there for some, like they have all these like different people. Yeah,
Madame Kira, who I actually in my notes wrote that she was a nun, and when reading about the movie and reading the whole breakdown, apparently she's just a housekeeper.
Oh, she was dressed like a nun.
I thought she was dressed like a nun also.
I had her written as a nun too. Yeah,
that's exactly what I had written through my whole notes, and then I'm reading the notes, and I'm like, oh, she's a housekeeper. Okay, yeah. She tells the general that evil is among them, and at the beginning there's kind of a disclaimer that people had lost the great gods that this takes place in Greece.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the Greek gods had been replaced with these mythical evil creatures. It's kind of like the degradation of religion represented there.
Yeah.
And she tells him there's a Vorvalaka, which is a mythical evil creature, and that brings death, and that it's a young woman, Thea. She says she is this creature, and she's the companion of the architect's wife. She's kind of like a house girl. She helps her with her hair and
with the medicine and stuff like that. She helps people. Yeah, the plague is going around. That's why these people are on this island. They're hiding from the plague. It's
very strange. They go to bed at night, and the husband and wife on the stairs kiss and go in opposite direction, and the young girl goes with the wife. So she like stays with her. Like I said, brush her hair, gives her medicine.
Yeah, I don't know if they're doing some kind of quarantine thing where they're trying to keep everyone separate in different rooms. I don't know if it's European 40s fashion to do that. No idea.
I thought the same thing. Thea is upset at the presence of the general and refuses to serve him wine.
Yeah.
and which was kind of an interesting point. The general kind of laughs off the superstition. He laughs off what Madame Kira tells him, and laughs off that the woman thinks he's evil.
Yeah. They have this movie does touch on the science versus religion conversation. They do it pretty decently. I mean, it's kind of interesting. They kind of throw it in there. Nothing like intellectual that really makes you think, but they're putting it into the story.
I in my notes I wrote that Madame Kira reminds me of Miss Carmody from the grocery store, The Mist, in that she's perpetuating all this religious propaganda, and through difficult situations actually gets people on her side and start to do her bidding.
That's a great observation. Yeah,
but you're right. It's science versus religion in the way they handle this situation. So the general and Davis agree to stay the night. And in the morning, there was a tin salesman who happened to be holed up with the group, Robbins, and they thought he was drunk the night before. And in the morning, he's dead. And
he goes upstairs. He's like, I'm not feeling too well. And they're like, well, that's what happens when you get drunk, Mr. Robbins. And then
he drank too much.
He stumbles upstairs and
Dr. Drosos determines the cause to be the plague and then quarantines everyone on the island. Nobody can leave. And the general was anxious to get back to his men, but he quickly jumps in and becomes the enforcer of the doctor's rules.
It's his nature. It's what he does. He's proud of it. He's proud of being a watchdog. That was his nickname. He's like, listen, I protect people. That's what I do. I take care of my men, So like, he immediately takes that on, which is kind of a funny military trope, because I know a lot of people go in the military for 20 years and they come out and they're still kind of in the military in their head. You know what I mean? So wherever he goes, his role is like, that's my role.
Yep. And he just puts himself in. Doctor says this. Well, I'm in charge now of enforcing the doctor's rules. And Karloff, I found myself just watching him through a lot of the movie. His acting, his mannerisms, his facial expressions. He plays this just dour, stern.
Yeah.
He doesn't seem like a good time. Like you don't want to have a drink.
No, he doesn't. Yeah, I was kind of like, even I'd be uncomfortable around him. I think he did a really good job acting in this movie.
His eyebrows are dark and the rest of him's kind of grayish, and he uses them with these just fierce expressions on his face. I thought it was interesting.
Yeah, he furrows his eyebrows a lot when he's talking to people and kind of contorts his face, and he kind of cocks his neck in distrust when he's talking to people. I liked it.
I did too. Yeah. I just found my eyes were constantly drawn to him on the screen.
Yeah.
Which is just a testament to his greatness.
Yeah, he steals the show.
It's funny. They have a scene now when they put this quarantine in place. And again, we're talking 1945. And they determine, they can't gather in crowds. There's a scene where the doctor's showing everyone how to wash their hands thoroughly. It's very COVID-like in 1945.
Yeah. I don't think I have actually. I was doing some research on a lot like quarantine and stuff, and our methods for quarantining and dealing with that stuff really haven't changed in 100 years. You come back 100 years, it's the same. What we knew then is kind of what we do now. Wash your hands, stay away from people.
It's funny, pre-COVID, you see these things in movies and they really don't register as much of anything. But as a world that we live through it, it's like it just rings so many bells of familiarity now.
Well, you watch that stuff and you're like, what were they afraid of? The plague? What is this? The 1800s? Yeah, you know what I mean?
The doctor tells them all that the hot, dry Sirocco winds will blow in and the plague will be gone in a day. So they're waiting for the wind to shift.
Yeah.
The next day, a British diplomat who's there with his wife passes away, and the wife refuses to believe he is dead. She's always had a fear of premature burial, and can't be convinced her husband's dead, even though she's poking him with a needle and he won't respond. But they bury him anyways, and she finally accepts the fact that I guess he really was dead.
Yeah.
The next twist is that Dr. Drosos dies next, proving that science is not immune to this plague situation.
Yeah, and it's interesting. He kind of gives into religious presuppositions. Like he's kind of like, yeah, well, I'm meeting my old enemy, death, for the last time, and it looks like he's going to win. I've met him many times in the military, and this time he wins. And like he kind of like does a little prayer with the fire and kind of gives a little sacrament, There was a nice conversation you had there. Like even at the end, he's like, "Yeah, I guess we all become superstitious at some point on our deathbed." You know?
Yeah, and it's funny this simple few things that have happened. Kira once again starts talking to the general and tells her of his suspicion, and there's where she starts to challenge his beliefs, and he, in my mind, easily is swayed over. Since the doctor died, he's now like, maybe science isn't the answer, and maybe she's onto something.
Yeah,
so perhaps it is sorcery.
He's kind of breaking down. Like he's kind of losing it. He's kind of stuck on this like tyrannical mindset that he has, and then he's also kind of like, well, what if the stuff is true? So he's kind of like he's got this dichotomous thing going in his mind which kind of causes people to go crazy. So it's kind of cool to watch him lose his mind.
The concept, I think, is accurate, and I think the idea makes sense. I just feel like this hard and steadfast man who just is by the book all day, as we know. Two people die and he abandoned everything he believes and he's ready to switch. I don't feel it was developed well enough in an hour and 10-minute movie.
The execution of this movie could have been done, I think, a lot better in modern times. I think you could like remake this movie. I think they had a lot of good concepts here. But I think also what they were trying to do, and this was my take from it, was to make the audience wonder, was there some kind of haunting force there that was making him do that? And the first thing I thought of was The Shining. You know, like the house is making the father lose his mind, right? Like, so like I had like, it makes you wonder, like, wait, is there really these demons that are making him do it? Are they getting into his head kind of, like, you know what I mean? Like, is it real or is it really superstition? Like he said. And I think that's what they're trying to do with it.
Yeah. And that kind of plays into the title, The Isle of the Dead, which, sounds like a movie George Romero made. But is totally different vein. That night, Thea, the young girl, goes out and visits Oliver in the woods. The newsman. They kind of have a connection and they kiss, and they are interrupted by the general who is following her. And now he tells them that he thinks Thea is the Vorvalaka, and as soon as he can prove it, he will put an end to her. And Oliver says, "This is ridiculous, and in the morning I'm taking her out of here."
Yeah. You've lost your mind, pal.
He shouldn't have played his hand, because when the morning rolls around, the general had wrecked the boat, so no one can leave.
Yeah. So now everyone's just kind of they're all starting to turn on each other in a way, or at least on the general, and the general's turning on them.
Yeah, and he's being convinced that this young girl who's not done anything to anybody that we've seen, is evil.
Yeah, and he takes care of his men and his troops, and that's what he's doing, right? So he's still hard fast on, I'm taking care of everyone. You guys aren't leaving here with the plague and infecting my troops. Yeah,
right. That later that day, the architect's wife falls ill, and Thea locks the door and stays with her the night. And of course, she's been charged with taking care of her, and they seem to really care for each other. And while she's in there, in the middle of the night, Kira's prowling the hallway and keeps shouting through the door, mocking her and calling her out as evil. And it's kind of childish, but it really starts to bother Thea that she's being called all these awful things.
Yeah, and they kind of just go after her. They're trying to get like in her head.
In the morning, the room is quiet, so Kira goes and gets the general, and he breaks in and he finds Mrs. St. Aubin, the architect's wife, is dead, and they blame Thea. Oliver grabs her and gets her out of there, and she goes out in the woods to kind of get away from everything.
Yeah.
They carry Mrs. St. Aubin's casket into a tomb, and they leave her, which is funny that her husband seems to show zero emotion towards the death of his wife. I mean, she was sick.
Yeah.
Maybe he had accepted it, but it's like he's taking out the garbage. He's like
completely
emotionless.
There was some stuff like that. This movie was lacking a lot of development with character and stuff. But at this point in the movie, you kind of just take it in stride. Like it goes right back to like when the general's wife wasn't in the tomb. He's like, all right, let's get out of here. It's like
strange.
Yeah.
There's when they leave, you hear pounding from the inside of the woman's casket.
Yeah.
and we get to a scene where the winds change and the warm wind is now blowing in. So by the doctor's definition, they can now leave, but the general is showing signs of the plague and knows he's not going to make it very far.
Yeah.
So he's not letting anybody leave because he figures they all got it at this point.
Yeah. He's like, I'm not getting off this island. He's like, all right, the island owns you,
Right.
Yeah.
Thea's hiding in the woods. She hears singing. She hears a voice, and she follows it to the tomb where she sees someone in flowing white robe run away. And we then see a shadowy figure kill Kira in her bed with a blade, with an ornate decorative blade. And we're not fans of Kira. She's misguided. She's causing trouble.
She has an evil cackling laugh, when she's kind of taunting the general earlier in the movie. Yeah, she just has this evil feel to her.
But we really didn't want to see her dead per se, but she gets stabbed. And, they all go and realize that Mrs. St. Aubin is no longer in her casket. And they go looking for her. The general sits up and he sees Kira dead. And he figures Thea must have done it, and he gets up to go after her, but the figure in white stabs the general and puts him back down. And the woman in white, who we believe is Mrs. St. Aubin, she goes running out of the building, and they start chasing her, and she just runs off of a cliff, presumably to her own death.
Yeah.
So if there was a Vorvalaka in their presence, it was perhaps her, not young Thea.
Yeah. I mean, it takes control of their body. It's an undead creature, so it's for all intents purposes in their folklore and Greek mythology, Greek folklore. It's like a zombie or like a vampire that like doesn't exactly have blood, but yeah, it's like an undead thing. So like it probably took her body.
And the dying general says that he saw the Vorvalaka and all of its evil face to face, and then he dies.
Yeah.
And we know that was Mrs. St. Aubin. So, that kind of lends us to believe that if anyone was possessed, it was her. And her sickness may not have been a sickness, but may have been this possession.
Right. Yeah. It was because we hear her screaming in the coffin later. So it's like maybe it was in the process of being possessed, or maybe she did die. And then after it possessed her in the cave, like, in the casket, I mean, it comes back to life, and that's what the scream is. Yeah. It
doesn't really explain. The next morning, a boat comes, and Oliver and Thea leave the island, and that's the end of the story. Again, I thought there was some interesting ideas here. Again, we're talking, 1940s. There's no blood, there's no gore,
there's no monster, really.
There's no swearing. It's a very, very tame movie. It's something you would watch more for the exploration of the ideas.
Yep.
More than any on-screen action. Again, the thing I took worthwhile from it was watching Karloff's performance, because and you can see in his facial expressions what he brought to the monster in Frankenstein. He emotes so much with his face that before a lot of people did back then, and I thought he was brilliant. But
yeah, he was brilliant. I agree. His acting was top notch. It was worth watching just for that. Like you said, I think the movie had some great ideas, but it's very dated with its production and whatever issues that they had. But you could see that it had a lot of flaws. But it's a movie that's 75, 80 to 78 years old. So it kind of comes with that. But I think it's one of those movies that could be remade. I think it has interesting ideas. It could have a lot of tension.
It definitely does. It could be. Yeah, it could be upgraded. There's some. I believe Martin Scorsese has this on his list of 10 most horrifying films he's ever seen, which is he really must be probing deep into the mental anguish that they experience, because nothing on the screen is terrifying in really any way.
Yeah, and also maybe he saw it when he was really young and it just stuck with him. He's talking about the movies that scared him along his life and things that influenced him. And he probably saw that at a young age. It scared him, and he probably took away a lot of psychological ideas for movies, like you said, influence.
Yeah. All right, so that's our first movie. We move on to our second film, which is Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein from 1948, directed by Charles Barton. And we kind of touched on this a little bit already, but I think this movie kind of gets a bad rap for the reasons that you brought up, and it's kind of viewed as the end of the Universal Monsters era, and it's kind of viewed as starting the tail off of Abbott and Costello's career. And I really think it's a better film than that. I actually think it's funny.
I laugh legitimately. I think this movie is hilarious. I love Abbott and Costello. So,
I think they're at peak performance here.
Yeah,
I think they play their characters well. The Wilbur character is with his facial expressions and the dumb situations he gets them in.
Yeah,
I think he's perfect.
Yeah,
and the thing about the monsters is you have Dracula.
Yeah.
Being played by Bela Lugosi for only the second time ever.
It's a A-list, A-tier list acting in this movie. Like, you have all the big names.
And despite the comical situation, and nobody's going to take away that this movie is terrifying or horrific, like, he plays it straight.
Same with Lon Chaney and Bella. Yeah, they played straight. And it's interesting that what they did was they took elements from 31 Dracula and 1941 Wolfman and kind of recreated some of those scenes to kind of bring back that authenticity, that it was like these characters are in the movie. Like when they're chasing, when they're when they're the search team, like from Wolfman, they kind of did that again. The Dracula with the mansion and stuff in those scenes, and like Frankenstein, like they kind of bring all the elements of those movies back and then just kind of insert Abbott and Costello into it, and I think they created it perfectly.
And it's funny, the title is Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein. Frankenstein has the least to do and the smallest role. He's most of the time just laying on a gurney waiting to be revived.
Yeah.
But imagine if they had gotten Karloff to come back for that. That really would have been something.
Why do you know why they weren't able to do that?
I don't know.
Yeah.
There was an actor named Glenn Strange.
Glenn Strange, yeah.
And they also talk about, you're 17 years after the release of Frankenstein. They replaced a lot of the makeup with rubber mask and pieces.
Yeah.
And going 17 years forward, the Frankenstein monster makeup severely lacks compared to the original.
It has that Spirit Halloween, rubber mask look to it. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. They said they were able to get the makeup done in an hour a day per character, so it saved them a lot of production time.
It wasn't Lon Chaney doing it like 4 or 5 hours when he was doing the Wolfman by himself.
And they had him down to an hour for this movie too.
And that's actually the scene where Frankenstein throws Sandra, the scientist, out the window. That's Lon Chaney dressed up as Frankenstein because Glenn Strange hurt his ankle.
Yeah, he broke his foot. Another broken foot story for you, Matt.
I'm still in my cast.
I discovered that in my research as well, and I thought that was pretty cool. And it's actually funny. I made a note of that scene before I knew that. And in this middle of this kind of farcical comedy, that scene is straight horrific. They're on the top level of this castle overlooking these rocks, and he just picks up this lady and chucks her through the window.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty horrifying. Here's this like 7-foot monster just breaks himself free, and he's gonna come after Wilbur Costello, and then she jumps in the way like heroically, and then he's like, "Oh, you're dead then."
That's what I kind of mean about it. It really achieves that balance. I thought it did a good job of being, true to the monsters and a good comedy at the same time.
And we have comedy horrors now that are popular, have been for the last 30 years, going all the way back. Leslie Nielsen was doing them in the 90s. Like you look at the scary movies, like they have all the characters. They have the Hellraiser characters. They have the Scream characters. We do that now and people love it, so maybe back then people were a little more pretentious, like, no, you can't take our serious characters away from us, but like we do it now. It's a fun thing to do. We have comedy parody, like horror parodies all the time. So I thought this one was one of the original comedy horror parodies, and it does it great.
We'll walk through the plot real quick. It's not a complicated plot by any means, but
No.
it starts with Lawrence Talbot is in London, and he's making a call to the Florida baggage office to warn them not to deliver 2 crates to McDougal's House of Horrors. And, of course, Wilbur answers the phone, but before Talbot can tell him the whole story, he transforms into Wolfman. Yep. And we actually get a full facial transformation scene, that we don't
we get a couple of
Wolfman.
We get like 3 of them in this movie. It was pretty cool.
I mean, we get none in the actual original Wolfman, which I thought was kind of cool.
Kudos to Lon Chaney keeping a straight face, because he plays this character like he plays Talbot like he did in Wolfman, like a serious, distressed character, and right by Costello, who's being goofy the whole time.
Right. And Chaney's intense, and he's almost manic in certain scenes. And you're right; it's an interesting juxtaposition between the two actors. But I think they both did exactly what their role was.
What they had to do. Yeah. They didn't try to be anything else. They just did what they had to do, and it juxtaposed perfectly.
So they never get the message clearly from the Wolfman now, because Chaney can't talk; he's just growling into the phone. So Wilbur and Chick actually deliver the crates, which includes Dracula's coffin and a box containing Frankenstein's monster. And when they deliver Dracula's coffin, the lid keeps opening when Wilbur's in there alone. This is basically one of those movies where Wilbur knows something's going on, but at every turn when he tries to show somebody, it's not there. So they just
it's a comedic bit.
So they just
you bozo.
Yeah, exactly. So at one point, Dracula gets out of the coffin and he goes and hides in the shadows.
Yeah.
And when they unbox Frankenstein's monster, he hypnotizes Wilbur and takes the monster, and they leave together. And they're kind of just lurking in the shadows. Yeah. So Wilbur sees it, even though he's kind of frozen in place. But Chick doesn't believe him. And McDougal's mad because things he just bought are now not there.
Yeah, he's infuriated. It's $20,000 worth of stuff, he said. Yeah.
So he has Chick and Wilbur arrested, thinking that, any cop's going to look, where did you put it?
Right. Yeah.
I mean, they carted these things in. They didn't put it in their pocket and run away with it. It's not a bag of diamonds.
Yeah, I'd be like, listen, it was lost on the way over here. This is how we received it. I got an invoice right here.
But Dracula brings the monster to Sandra, who is a woman who's been grooming Wilbur. She's playing.
Yeah, this is actually where a lot of the comedy starts coming in. He starts getting groomed.
And Chick can't understand what this woman sees in Wilbur.
Yeah, the whole premise behind this movie is that Costello is a simple idiot.
Absolutely, they want a pliable brain to put in the brain of the monster, somebody who won't think on their own and will just do what they're told. So he has to get seduced, which he gets seduced easily because he's stupid. Sure. So the boys get bailed out of jail from Joan, who works for the insurance company, who's tasked with finding the missing items. And if she believes they really stole them, getting an in with them is the best way to track these items. So Joan is now flirting with Wilbur for his affections, trying to have them lead her to the missing items.
Yeah, and he's kind of like adjusting his style. Like, yeah, you see that? I still got it,
and Chick's scratching his head like, I don't understand all these.
He pulls him by the window. He's like, no, he's like, what are you doing? He's like, I need to get a good look at you. Like, what are they looking at?
Yeah.
The whole time he's just losing his mind over it.
He does a sample. He's like, well, what are you going to do with 2 women? He's like, I don't know. I like this one, but I really like this one.
Yeah.
And
Well, the
he
third one
tells,
comes along. Let's say her name's Mary, and he's like,
yeah, you can have Mary.
you can have Mary.
He gives him the hypothetical.
Yeah.
It was kind of funny.
Yeah. I still think this movie's funny. I cracked up the whole time. I have a simple taste in this. I'm like Three Stooges all day. I do this kind of humor.
Yeah, they did it well, I thought. Like I said, I think this movie gets a bad rap. I really enjoyed this movie every time I've seen it, from
Oh, I loved
a
it.
kid all the
Yeah.
way up till a few days ago when I rewatched it.
Yeah, I'm gonna make my son watch it this Halloween. He's gonna be like, great. I gotta watch this old school movie with dad. I'm like, yep.
So Talbot shows up and he tells Wilbur and Chick what is happening. That Dracula's there and that he's looking to put a new brain in the monster and he's trying to stop him. So ever since the original Wolfman, and we talked about him when we covered this, it's actually the first movie we covered on our podcast, so kind of a cool throwback.
It was, yeah. I was thinking the same thing.
He was a sympathetic victim, not really a monster. Well, in all the later iterations, Universal made him a heroic monster where he was always trying to do good and help people, even though he'd be suffered with these transformations and become this, raging wolf.
Which I love that angle with the Wolfman. Like I like that. I like that because it makes a complicated character, a complicated story. This like Byronian hero, Byronic hero, I think it's called.
It adds a little depth that you don't typically see in characters like that.
Yeah, it's not black and white. It's gray, and no pun for being a werewolf, but
Talbot makes Wilbur and Chick lock him in his hotel room at night for his transformation.
With no explanation. He's like, just lock me in.
Yeah, take the key.
Like, okay, yeah.
And I'll see you in the morning. And of course, there's Wilbur forgets something and goes in to bring it to him. And then there's this, this dance around where, the wolf's trying to get him, but he's always moving the opposite direction. And he lunges at him just as he moves from a chair. And it's, they really don't paint the Wolfman as a very terrorizing character.
Right. He's being outsmarted by the goofball, like without even trying.
And this is probably where Lon Chaney Jr. was, feeling that his character was kind of made into a buffoon to some degree. And I get what he's saying.
Well, yeah, it's a comedy. So I mean, yeah.
Yeah, they're all going to a masquerade ball that night, and they meet at Sandra's house, which is kind of like this castle on the hill. And when they get there, the phone rings and they answer, and it's Talbot telling them that they're actually in Dracula's house. And they start to look around and they find an underground boat dock, and Wilbur stumbles through a fake wall where he's in a room with the monster and Dracula who gets out of his coffin. And of course they play through the fake wall thing where he goes back through to tell Chick. They go through, and then it's very Scooby-Doo-ish where the monsters are now on the other side of the wall.
Yeah, I think Scooby-Doo-ish is a very good way to explain this whole movie.
Yeah. So so again, Chick can't see what Wilbur's seeing and thinks he's just nuts.
Right. And since he's that type of character, like, of course he would be this goofy, right?
Yeah. So they get back into the main part of the house, and Sandra is getting cold feet about performing the operation. She said there's too many people asking questions. The lab assistant is asking questions. Who's this Joan lady from the insurance company? Yeah,
it's like, there's way too many variables there. Like, we're screwed. We can't do this. And Dracula's like, I'm not someone who likes to be told what to do.
And he stares at her, and he uses the glowing eyes.
Look into my eyes. Yeah, he does that.
And I actually found the Dracula character when he's in the shadows with the cape pulled up, half covering his face, is not when I found him at his creepiest, when he's actually talking and engaging people and kind of hiding who he really is. That's when I found him the scariest.
I thought the same thing when he's this dark, evil character and he's just being charming, like, hello, everyone, welcome to dinner. You know what I mean? And you're like, no, wait, this guy's evil. You know what I mean? Like, that's when he's kind of like the most right. Whereas like what's funny now is him holding up the cape like that. Like, it's actually comedic, which back then it was the thing, but like, actually it's very telling that it's in this comedy parody movie, and it's actually now very parodied. Like you look at it like, you did that in a movie now, it'd be cheesy.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So Dracula has hypnotized her, and she's completely at his will now.
Hmm.
They go to this party via boat, and both Talbot and Dracula show up there. And Dracula takes Joan to dance with her, and he hypnotizes her too, and they disappear. So the boys, along with Talbot, they go off looking for Joan, and of course, Talbot transforms again. And Chick brought a wolf mask to this party. So Wilbur encounters the Wolfman now and thinks it's Chick in a mask, and he's whacking him and he's like kicking him in the pants. And again, I guess more degradation of the Wolfman character.
Yeah, I guess he was a little mad. Yeah, like a WWE character saying, "No, you can't ruin my character." Like,
and then so he starts chasing him angrily, but then he trips over a brush and tumbles down a little hill. And
because in the original movie he was a menace, you know what I mean? Whereas now it's like, he's doing Three Stooges stuff. So
Wilbur, while he's going through the woods, encounters Dracula, who changes into a bat,
which I thought was impressive for 1940. I was like, how'd they do that?
Yeah, well, and they do it in the 1931.
In 1931, too. Yeah, it's impressive. Yeah,
it looks like animation blended with real film, but it's cool. It doesn't hold up today, but when you put yourself
for
in
its
the
time,
era,
it's cool. It's cool that they did it. It's not like he's flying away on strings. You know what I mean? Like
right.
They did it. They did a CGI thing for all intents purposes.
Exactly. Yeah, early CGI, right? He chases him onto the boat where Sandra and Joan and the lab assistant are all there, and they're all in a trance. And Chick comes upon the boat, and he sees the bat turn back into a man, and he finally sees Dracula. So he's like, "Oh my God, Wilbur's been telling the truth this whole time."
Yeah.
But Dracula somehow hypnotizes him and knocks him out.
Which I think, by the way, is one of Dracula's coolest powers that I think we've kind of forgotten. He's always biting people modern day. You know what I mean? Like Dracula could hypnotize people. That was one of his things.
Yeah.
They don't use that enough in modern film.
Yeah, they used it a lot back then.
Yeah, that was his thing.
So Dracula and his group of hypnotized people, they all take off on the boat. In the morning, Talbot and Chick wake up, and Talbot's back to being, not a wolf anymore, and Chick comes to from being knocked out by Dracula, and they go to rescue Wilbur. Now he's back at the castle, and he's locked up in the stockades, waiting to have his brain transferred into the monster. And when they get there, Chick runs in and he releases Wilbur, and Talbot goes to rescue the others. And Wilbur goes back to the boat, and they're all going to leave, but they realize he's gone, and Dracula calls him back telepathically.
And he skips into the cave.
Yeah, now he's so happy to go back in there, he starts skipping. Yeah. So Talbot shows up at the boat. He's there now. Chick shows up. They got the insurance lady. They got the lab assistant, and Wilbur's gone. So they leave them there, and Chick and Talbot go back into the lab. And as Talbot is trying to release Wilbur, he looks up the window and the moon's out again.
So this is the third month of this movie.
They do full moons like 3 nights in a row. I thought the same thing. I'm like, wow, full moon every night.
Every night.
How unusual.
Lon Chaney's just exhausted. Like, why does this keep happening every night? Like,
I got to shave. So he changes in the middle of trying to release Wilbur. So now Dracula and the Wolfman are fighting over Wilbur, and they're at opposite ends of this gurney, and they're spinning him, and they're pushing back and forth, and he's just howling, yelling the whole time.
Yeah.
And finally they run off, and the Wolfman chases Dracula away. At this point, the monster wakes up, and he goes towards Wilbur. And as we talked about earlier, Sandra, I don't know if she broke her hypnosis or just, her moral goodness rose up.
Well, she did, because you remember when Abbott had the chair, he went like this with the chair, and the back of the chair hit her in the head and knocked her out. And so that knocked her hypnosis out.
That's right. Good point. So now she's not hypnotized anymore.
Right.
But she was in on this from the beginning. So let's not pretend she was a good
Yeah, she's
person.
not innocent. Yeah.
She's not innocent.
Suddenly trying to redeem herself at the end by stepping in and saving. It's like, oh, you still put everyone in this situation.
She steps in front of Wilbur, and the monster picks her up. And you mentioned Lon Chaney, who had played the monster in other films before, wore the makeup, picks her straight over his head and throws her through a glass window. And they don't show it, but they're up on a cliff, and she's just careening down the stone, and blood splattered at the bottom.
It's vicious. Yeah.
So it was just like, wow, they actually threw her out the window.
The implication of that, who just boom, just threw her right out. Yeah, I was like, even when I was watching, I was like, whoa. I thought he was just gonna throw her to the ground.
Right?
I mean? Like,
over his head and out the window. So
Frankenstein is a monster.
Chick and Wilbur now are trying to get out, and they run, and they keep getting caught between the monster chasing them, and then the battle between Wolfman and Dracula. So they run here, and Dracula and Wolfman are fighting. So they run back this way, and the monster's at this door.
Yeah.
Another Scooby-Doo-ish scene.
There's Benny Hill music playing, right? Yeah. It's one. Yeah.
But this scene I actually thought was pretty cool. The monsters kind of battle their way out to a balcony of a bedroom, and Dracula changes to a bat and is about to fly away. And Wolfman grabs the bat, and as he grabs him as he's diving, and he grabs him and he dives off the balcony, and they fall to the sea below, way below, and basically they're both gone.
Yeah, it's cool.
The Wolfman sacrificed himself to eliminate Dracula. Is kind of the idea.
Lon Chaney's character of the Wolfman is still today my favorite depiction of it. Like I like how they portray him as he's a good person and then has this transformation.
Yep. I thought that was a cool scene. Just sacrificed himself, and it was, the effects were kind of good.
Yeah.
For the time. So Chick and Wilbur are running to get to the boat, but the monster is stalking them, and he's on the dock. They get into a boat and they're trying to row away, but they're still tied up, and he's throwing barrels at them like he's Donkey Kong or something.
Yeah.
And they untie the rope, and the lab assistant, him and Joan were filling up buckets with gas, and they come to the dock and they douse the dock with the gas and they light it.
Yeah.
And in another scene that I thought was starkly different from the tone of the rest of the movie, is the monster gets engulfed in the flames and is walking back, and the dock collapses in this, and he, his flaming body just falls into the sea.
Yeah.
I'm thinking, man, that's pretty hard for, this comedy.
Yeah. And it's actually a really good stunt too. It's like I had said before in one of the previous episodes, one of my favorite stunts in movies is when they do live action people on fire, because the stuntmen that do that are insane. And I just find it really cool. And so they have this guy walking with this big padded suit on, walking through the fire. And even for 1948, I'm always impressed with that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and it was well done.
Yeah.
So now Chick and Wilbur are sitting on the boat, and they're kind of, wow, this is over. And they say there's nothing left to frighten us. And behind them, the Invisible Man lights a cigarette and says, "Oh, I wanted in on the fun," and starts laughing.
And they go and later make an Invisible Man Abbott and Costello movie, right?
Yeah, they did. But the cameo was, cameo of nobody, but the cameo was great. They just jump in the water, and the Invisible Man's laughing, and that's the end of the film. So again, this is an enjoyable film if you love the Universal monsters and you enjoy a comedy. I thought it, like I said, we said when we did horror comedies a few weeks ago, it's kind of the first one that did it and did it well, and kind of set the groundwork for everything that came after it.
Oh, the Invisible Man, that was Vincent Price. That's who voiced it.
Yeah, you could tell the voice right away.
Yeah. I had to look it up. I was like, I knew it, but I had to look that up real quick.
Even go back to if they could have got Karloff, they could have had Chaney, Lugosi, Vincent Price, and Karloff.
They do a whole do the whole thing. They probably tried. I imagine they tried, and they got as many people on board as they could. And
whatever you were offering them, double it.
Yeah,
you got to make that happen.
Yeah, because you only get it one time, right? And then years go on. It's like, I'm glad we made that. But it's a fun comedy horror.
It is. Yeah, there's enough horrific elements from the classic monsters, and you really, you get to see a new take on them, and the stories.
Well, they don't
funny.
they don't make it cheesy. Yeah, like you said, like they do the classic 1931 Bela Lugosi. They do the Lon Chaney 1941. Like they actually do those scenes well.
Mm-hmm.
Like they don't even cheap out on it. Like the Frankenstein burning alive. Like I think they did everything really well, and then they just throw in the great Abbott and Costello comedy, and I think the whole thing just works.
Yeah, within the same scene, within the same shot, you'll see people playing it straight as they could, and you'll see Lou Costello flailing around like a buffoon. But it works. I like I said, I've always enjoyed this movie. I thought it was terrific.
Yeah, me too.
All right, so that is the best of the decade, the 1940s. We got an interesting one next week. We're going to look at Horror Master B-sides and what that is defined as. It's funny, horror is, the icons of horror often are the directors. You go to other movies and it's like, Mission Impossible. Tom Cruise is an action star. People will go see Tom Cruise
Arnold
movies.
Schwarzenegger and Tom Cruise. Yeah.
But John Carpenter is a horror star.
Yeah.
Wes Craven is a horror star. So
James Wan movies come out. You got to check it out. You're like, of course. The new Mike Flanagan show is going to come out. You checking that out? Yeah.
Jordan Peele has become, kind of a new version. But I always found it funny that the horror icons are often the directors. So our concept was simply take an iconic horror director and let's look at some of their lesser known films. So we got a couple interesting ones for next week. That should be a lot of fun.
Yeah, it is going to be a lot of fun. There's some good flicks.
And that's a deep category, because you start going, Romero's got some underseen gems, and Carpenter, and
you
Craven,
could do this. We could do a lot of these movies. It was hard for me to pick one. It took me. I had to sit there for an hour and think about it. There's a lot. You could throw a dart at a board. You could just pick one.
Absolutely. Yeah, I had like 5 immediately come to mind, and I just had to pick one. So that'll be a lot of fun. So that is our show for this week. We thank you for listening as always. This is the Weekly Horoscope. I'm Jerry. That's Matt, and we will see you next time. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Jerry.
Your Weekly Horoscope with Jerry and Matt.